Do you mind?
But he's going to check on other implications and stuff.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. For this one guy who had
All right, let's get started. Okay, this is a scanning view of the testes, showing the testes. All right, so the testes is made up of these winding tubules called seminiferous tubules where spermatogenesis is taking place. All right, so that's where the spermatozoa are formed, and then they're passed on to your epididymis. Then they are passed on from there. All right, so we have these tubules called the seminiferous tubules that are sitting in the testes. And you have this connective tissue covering that's called your tunica albuginea that covers the organ. All right, so that pretty much goes all the way around, and then towards one side of the testes, you're going to have a portion of the tunica albuginea that starts to become thicker. All right, so pretty much that's where you have like your blood vessels coming in and out of the testes, and that's where you're going to have the beginning of where it's going to transfer the spermatozoa to your epididymis. All right, so this region of the tunica albuginea is called the mediastinum testes. All right, so we'll look at that at low power. All right, so in here we have our seminiferous tubules, and those are pretty much separated by some loose connective tissue. All right, so it's inside of each one of these where we have spermatogenesis taking place. So these are very coiled tubules, so it looks like, it's a lot of separate tubules, but it's pretty much just this coiled tubule that when it's cut, you have all these different sections. All right, so this is our tunica albuginea here. And as we move towards this region, you'll notice it starts to get a lot thicker. All right. So this region is called the mediastinum testes, where it starts to get much thicker. All right. Now within that region, you're gonna have these also these coiled tubules that are called the reed testes. All right. So once the spermatozoa is made in the seminiferous tubules, they pass into the reed testes before they get into the epididymis. All right, so for this part, it's going to be the specific structure. All right, so these specific structures are our reed testes. All right, so again, this is just a series of these coiled tubules that you'll find that pretty much are taking the spermatozoa from the seminiferous tubules into your epididymis. All right, so let's take a look at our seminiferous tubules. All right, so this is where we're looking for the different cell types that are going to be formed during spermatogenesis. All right, so it's inside of each of these tubules that you'll find your spermatogonia, your primary and secondary spermatocytes, your spermatids, and your spermatozoa. All right, in between the tubules, you have another cell type, and these are called Leydig cells. All right, so those are found in the interstitial spaces, or in these spaces that are between the tubules. So they're lying in the connective tissue between the tubules. All right, so these are acidophilic cells. There's a bunch of them here. And we'll look at a different slide because this slide isn't staying too well, or it's not preserved too well. All right, but these are usually acidophilic cells that you'll find sitting in the spaces between the tubules. All right, and usually you have euchromatic nucleus, and the cytoplasm looks a little bit more pink, so it's more acidophilic than your cells in here inside the tubules. All right, so those would be your Leydig cells. So those are the cells that are making the testosterone within the testes. All right, so this is scanning view of another testes here. All right, so notice this one, we're not seeing too much of the tunica albuginea. Pretty much all we're seeing is the inside portion where we have our seminiferous tubules. All right, so again, it's gonna be ID the region or structure, I think. So each of these would be a seminiferous tubule. All right, and then if we take a closer look inside, then we can see how the whole process of spermatogenesis takes place. All right. All right, so the tubules have, sitting along this basement membrane here, we have our spermatogonia. All right, so that's the first cell type that's going to occur. And pretty much you have a small round euchromatic nucleus, and they're always sitting along the basement membrane. All right, so spermatogenesis is going to take place inwards. So we have the process, we're going to have the cell types, or the cell types changing as we go inward. So this first layer of cells here, that's our spermatogonia. That's the first cell type that's going to be made. All right, so this is an example of a spermatogonia. This is probably another one, probably about to move up into primary spermatocyte, because here we're able to see the chromosomes a little bit better. All right, so that's a spermatogonia sitting right on the basement membrane. All right, as we move inwards, you have the cells undergoing mitosis as we move inwards. So your primary spermatocytes, those are actively dividing. So you're able to see the chromosomes within the cells. So notice these cells, they're much larger than your spermatogonia, and the chromosomes are very visible. So all these cells are going to be primary spermatocytes. All right. The next step is the secondary spermatocytes, but usually once those are formed, they have a very short half-life. I think just a couple seconds or so, or a couple minutes. So most of the time, well, you're not really going to see those. So in theory, they're there, but we don't have to ID them. All right, so we have our spermatogonia, our primary spermatocytes, secondary spermatocytes that we're not identifying. And then the next step is your spermatid. All right, so what happens once you get past the primary and secondary spermatocytes, the cells start to get smaller. So it's losing a lot of the cytoplasm. The nucleus starts to become more condensed, and it's smaller and darker. All right, so you'll notice these cells that are a little bit closer to the lumen. The nucleus is still a little bit rounded, and it's a little bit more compact than our primary spermatocytes. So these would be our spermatids here. All right, and then as we move more inwards, you'll notice these cells where we have this very small, dark, condensed nucleus. All right, so those are your spermatozoa. And notice it has that oblong shape that's characteristic of our sperm cells. We have the head of the sperm cells, which has this oblong shape, and then the tails, well, we're not seeing most of the tails, but the tails usually are kind of lying in the lumen here. All right, so again, you're moving inwards. So you start with your spermatogonia, primary spermatocytes, spermatids, and then your spermatozoa. All right, oh, thank you, I forgot about those. All right.
There was two where you were before that were sitting right next to each other.
I saw that. Okay, here and there. All right, now you have another cell types that's sitting in the seminiferous tubules. These are called your Sertoli cells or your sustentacular cells. All right, now similar to what we saw in the female with the granulosa cells,